frozen air sliced through Lyra's lungs like shards of glass. The northern reaches of the Iron Lands were unforgiving, and tonight's blizzard was particularly bloodthirsty. As a scout for the Shadow Pack, Lyra could scent blood from a mile away, but this time, it wasn't the smell of prey that caught her attention. It was a high, piercing sound that cut through the howling wind. A cry. Beneath the fallen trunk of an ancient spruce lay the body of a woman, almost entirely buried in the snow. She was dead, her skin the blue tint of ice. But in her stiff arms, wrapped in blood-stained silk, a small, helpless life squirmed. Lyra knelt, her silver eyes widening in disbelief. As she touched the infant, she felt a strange tingling. The child's scent was intense, smelling of frozen pine and something metallic, something royal. On the babe's chest glinted a gold medallion, shaped like a dragon, entwined with a wolf crest that hadn't been seen in these lands for decades. Lyra knew one thing. If she left this child here, it would die within the hour. If she took it to the pack, she would risk everything. The great hall of the Shadow Pack reeked of old meat and wet fur. Lyra stood before the throne of Mallows, cradling the bundle against her chest. The Alpha, a massive man with a face mapped in scars, looked down at her with disdain. Around them, other warriors prowled, their inner wolves growling low, sensing a stranger scent. You bring us another mouth to feed in the heart of winter, Lyra? Mallows' voice thundered in her skull. Our stores barely last for our own pups. This child is weak. It does not carry our blood. It is a burden that will slow us down. Lyra grit her teeth, feeling her own wolf bristle beneath her skin. This is no ordinary child, Mallows. I found her with a woman who belonged to no known pack. This medallion. She didn't finish. The Alpha slammed his fist onto the arm of his throne, cutting her off with fury. Silence. Mallows' roar made the infant begin to wail. The law of the pack is clear. If it cannot hunt, it does not eat. Abandon that human carrion in the woods. That is the order of your Alpha. Lyra looked at Fenris, her mate, searching his eyes for support. They had been bonded for 2 years. They had planned for their own young. But Fenris looked away, his face a mask of cowardice. Do as he says, Lyra, he muttered under his breath. It's only one life. It isn't worth losing your place at the fire. Lyra's heart shattered in that moment, faster than ice under a mammoth's weight. She looked at the child's innocent eyes and felt a strength she had never known. If there is no room for mercy in this pack, then there is no room for me. I will not abandon her. Exile was not just a physical banishment. It was a surgical operation on the soul. Mallows approached her, placing his hand on her forehead, and his dominant aura hit her with the force of a battering ram. I, Mallows, Alpha of the Shadow, sever your bond. You are nothing. You are a shadow without a body. Your name shall be forgotten. Lyra fell to her knees, screaming in agony as the mental web connecting her to her brothers and sisters was brutally torn away. She felt a frigid void open in her mind. Fenris stood nearby, not even flinching as his own part of the bond with her evaporated, leaving behind a stinging scar. She was alone, cast out into the night, into the arms of the blizzard, with a crying child and a dagger at her belt. She found shelter in a shallow cave beneath a rocky overhang. Every muscle in her body trembled from the cold and the shock of the severance. She had to build a fire, or the infant wouldn't survive until morning. With shaking hands, she struck sparks, praying to the old gods of the forest. When a small flame finally illuminated the cave walls, Lyra pulled little Elara to her chest, trying to transfer the warmth of her own body. That was when she felt it, a heavy, predatory gaze boring into her back. In the darkness, just beyond the reach of the firelight, she saw 2 orbs. They weren't yellow like her kin's. They were a vivid neon green, glowing with an unnatural, almost magical brilliance. She fell asleep toward dawn, but was jolted awake by a snarl. 3 feral forest hounds, gaunt and maddened by hunger, stood at the cave entrance. Lyra slowly reached for her knife, stepping in front of Elara. She was weakened. Without the pack's support, her senses were dull. The first beast lunged, snapping its jaws inches from her face. Lyra stabbed out, but the other dwarves began to circle her. She knew she couldn't win this fight in human form, and shifting in this temperature could kill her. Just as the largest hound prepared for a fatal leap, the forest exploded in black dots, something massive, powerful, and fast as lightning blurred into the cave. The roar that followed made the stones vibrate beneath Lyra's feet. This was no wolf. It was a demon. A monstrous pitch-black wolf with glowing green eyes tore the throat out of the first hound in a fraction of a second. The others fled with a whimper. Not looking back, the black wolf turned slowly. He was so large, his back nearly brushed the cave ceiling. Lyra froze, clutching the child so tightly that Elara whimpered. The wolf stepped closer, his massive paws treading silently on the snow. Lyra prepared for death, but the beast stopped a meter away. The wolf bowed his head and began to draw in the air, analyzing the infant's scent. In those green eyes, for a split second, Lyra saw not hunger, but agony. And then, to her utter terror and confusion, the great wolf lay down at the cave entrance, blocking the freezing wind, and began to watch over their sleep. The days that followed were a blur of white frost and the rhythmic thrum of a heart that wasn't her own. Lyra lived in a state of hypervigilance, her silver eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Yet, the monster did not leave. The great black wolf, whom the legends called the Shadow of the Peaks, remained a silent, looming presence at the edge of her makeshift camp. He didn't speak in the way humans or shifters did through the mind link. He was too far gone for that. He was a creature of pure instinct, a king who had traded his crown for claws. Every morning, Lyra would wake to find the carcass of a deer or a mountain goat left at the mouth of the cave, still warm, the steam rising from the fresh kill. It was an offering or a tribute. "Why are you doing this?" Lyra whispered one evening, her voice hoarse from the dry, cold air. She was skinning the meat with her obsidian blade, her hands stained red. The wolf didn't move. He sat perched on a jagged rock, his neon green eyes reflecting the dying embers of her fire. He looked like a statue carved from obsidian, his fur absorbing the moonlight. He didn't snarl. He simply watched Elara, who was cradled in a nest of furs, gurgling at the dancing shadows on the ceiling dot as the weeks passed. Lyra's strength returned, but her isolation felt like a physical weight. The silence of being a severed wolf was deafening. There was no hum of the pack in her mind, no shared emotions, only the wind and the baby. However, a new, strange connection began to thrum in the air. It was a primal pull, a tether that seemed to vibrate every time the black wolf moved. The turning point came during a brutal ice storm that threatened to bury the cave. Elara had fallen ill, her small body burning with a fever that Lyra couldn't break. The child's cries were weak, a heartbreaking sound that tore at Lyra's soul. She had tried everything herbal poultices, worm stones, her own body heat, but the girl was fading. "I can't save her alone," Lyra sobbed, pulling the infant closer. "Please, if there is any soul left in you, help us." The black wolf rose. His massive frame filled the cave, casting a shadow that swallowed the firelight. He approached with a predatory grace that usually would have sent Lyra into a defensive shift, but she was too exhausted to fight. He let out a low, vibrating rumble, not a growl, but a purr that shook the very earth. He lowered his head, his wet black nose pressing against Elara's forehead dot in that moment. The scent hit Lyra with the force of a landslide, not in her exhaustion. Her senses had been dull, but now, as the wolf's breath mingled with the child's skin, the truth exploded in her mind. It wasn't just the smell of pine. It was a complex, regal aroma of ozone, ancient earth, and a specific sharp musk that belonged only to one lineage. It was the scent of the Thorn Kings. She gasped, her eyes flying to the gold medallion around the baby's neck. The wolf's eyes weren't just green. They were the exact shade of the emeralds embedded in the royal crest.
Now,
Varick.
child of the
She
wolves.
breathed, the name of the lost High King tumbling from her lips. You aren't the monster. You're her father. The wolf flinched at the name. A pained, human-like whimper escaped his throat. He began to lick the child's face with a tenderness that defied his terrifying form. As he did, a faint golden light began to pulse from the child's medallion, reacting to the wolf's proximity. The fever seemed to break instantly, the magical resonance of their shared blood acting as a healing balm. The beast looked up at Lyra, and for the first time, she didn't see a wild animal. She saw a man trapped in a prison of fur and grief, a king who had lost his mind when he thought his world had burned. He didn't shift back the trauma was too deep, but he nudged Lyra's hand with his snout, then looked toward the south dot. The realization was terrifying. If the child was a thorn, then the traitors who had murdered the queen were still looking for her. And Lyra, a nameless exile, was now the only thing standing between the last princess and the blades of the usurpers. She looked at the great wolf, then at the child. We have to go, she whispered, a new fire igniting in her silver eyes. Before they find us. The peace of the mountain was shattered on the 14th day of the Great Thaw. Lyra was outside the cave, teaching herself to hunt without the mental link of the pack, when the wind changed. It carried the scent of wet iron and scorched earth, the smell of the king's guard, but not the honorable men of old. These were the husks, warriors bound by blood magic to the usurper who had stolen Varick's throne. They are here, she hissed. Retreating into the shadows of the cave, the black wolf was already standing, his fur bristling like obsidian needles. He let out a sound that wasn't a growl, but a funeral knell. 10 men emerged from the mist, led by a man in gilded armor, Aaron, Varick's own brother. His eyes were cold, devoid of the emerald fire that marked the true lineage. So, the rumors were true, Aaron sneered, his hand resting on the hilt of a runic blade. The beast of the peaks has been playing nursemaid to a dead woman's brat. Give me the girl, Exile, and I might let you die quickly. Lyra stepped forward, her silver eyes glowing with a fierce, independent light. She didn't need a pack to be a warrior. She is the blood of the true king, Aaron, and you are nothing but a scavenger. At Aaron's command, the guards lunged. Lyra shifted in a blur of white fur and silver light. She was smaller than the armored men, but she was faster, fueled by a mother's desperation. She tore through the first line, her claws finding the gaps in their plate. But they were too many. A silver-tipped spear grazed her flank, and she fell, shifting back to her human form as she crashed against the stone dot as Aaron approached the crying Elara. The world went silent. The black wolf didn't just attack. He detonated. He threw himself into the fray with a suicidal fury, but Aaron was prepared. He struck the wolf with a pulse of dark magic from his blade, sending Varick crashing into the cavern wall. Brother, Aaron mocked, standing over the fallen wolf. Look at you, a dog in a cave. Lyra crawled toward Varick, her hand trembling as she reached for his matted fur. Varick, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. She needs her father, not the wolf, the king. She pressed her forehead against his, offering him the one thing he had lacked for years, a connection. She opened her mind, not as a subordinate, but as a mate, a partner, an equal. She showed him the scent of the pine, the warmth of the child, and the silver light of her own soul. She offered him a new bond to replace the one he had lost. The transformation was agonizing. The sound of snapping bone and tearing muscle filled the cave. The monstrous wolf shrank, the black fur receding into tan, scarred skin. A hand, human and trembling, reached out to grab Aaron's ankle. Varick rose. He was naked, covered in the filth of the wild, but his eyes were a blinding neon green. The power that rolled off him was so immense that the guards instinctively fell to their knees. "My daughter," Varick rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones. With a single, fluid motion, he disarmed Aaron. He didn't use a sword. He used the raw, elemental magic of the High Alphas. He shattered Aaron's runic blade with his bare hands and cast his brother out of the cave, leaving him to the mercy of the mountain. The remaining guards fled, their courage broken by the return of the true king. Silence returned to the cave, broken only by the crackle of the fire.
Only the strongest will
Elara's
survive
soft
this
cooing.
acquisition.
Varick turned to Lyra, his movements still predatory, but eyes full of a devastating humanity. He wrapped a discarded fur around his shoulders and knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her wounded side. "You stayed," he whispered, his emerald eyes searching hers. "When the world burned, you stayed for her." "I stayed for both of you," Lyra replied, leaning into his touch. Years later, the Kingdom of Thorn would tell legends of the Silver Queen and the Emerald King. They spoke of a reign built not on conquest, but on the strength of a bond forged in the coldest winter. As Lyra stood on the balcony of the restored palace, feeling the kick of a new life beneath her ribs, she looked toward the mountains. She was no longer an exile, and he was no longer a beast. They were home.